Thanks for tuning in to the ABC Music Talk podcast, the show for anyone interested in the music industry. This episode is going to explore, in my opinion, the most exciting music industry related project in the decentralized finance area in the business at the moment, or DeFi. But first, time to remind you all to go row to your videos. Rota is for artists, managers, labels, or anyone in the music industry who needs to create video content for promotion or monetization. Rota makes it fast, easy, and inexpensive to do all of that in one place. Head to www.abcmusic.co and click the Rota logo on the homepage to access a 10% off discount for the service. Welcome to the show, founder and CEO of Paperchain, Dan Dewar.
Hey Alex, how you doing?
Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate this. This is another one of those ones that we're recording over the wire, so any technical issues in the sound I do apologise for in advance, but Dan has very kindly tried to record his end of this for us, so that'll hopefully be nice and smooth. And Dan, where are you in the world?
I'm based in Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy currently. Had to move.
So East Coast?
Yeah, East Coast. Was in Manhattan and had a baby at the end of last year and moved out to the suburbs, as they say.
Congratulations on the baby.
Cheers.
And as we were just discussing before, he's now zooming around in a walker, crashing into things. So if listeners, you do hear anything like that, do not be alarmed. It's all under control. Dan's got this all under control.
He's doing his thing. He's doing it well. So.
Excellent stuff. Okay, so as I mentioned in my intro, to me, at least, Paperchain is the most exciting implementation of DeFi in the music industry to date. So can we kick it off with a quick overview of what Paperchain is, if you like, the elevator pitch for the business?
Sure. I mean, at most simple, we just call it's a wallet and card funded by a streaming revenue every day. So we've been looking at this problem of what has happened in streaming media and media in general, and this huge shift in consumption behavior where the ability to distribute and monetize content is instant, the ability to consume that is instant, but then the revenue and the payments hasn't kept up. So thought a long time about what data we can access to make that happen, what technology can help that happen, and we found this really nice stack that we can build on, particularly within the decentralized finance space, of making it possible where artists and creators can now get paid immediately, or at least daily, for the content that they're generating revenue on.
Okay, and so just maybe start to break that down a little bit more. Very specifically, we're talking about identifying revenue that they are going to be due and it will arrive at some point, but they haven't got it yet, and there's a reporting cycle, and that's a bit of a delay. And so you're kind of solving that middle bit. Is that the best way of describing it?
Yeah, exactly. So if you're an artist and you're generating income, we're just tapping into the data that is being generated, your streaming data. We can accurately price that and then make that available to you instantly. So all that you feel is that you now have a product now, or a digital wallet that is getting funds deposited daily based on your actual streaming activity. And you can access that through a card, or you can spend it, you can withdraw it. Pretty soon you'll be able to earn interest on it. It's just about putting a really simple product in front of creators that makes it possible for them to now access their revenue as they earn it, rather than either waiting for it or having to go in and get an advance or a long-term loan.
But how did you get into a situation where you have created this company? I mean, I know one of your other members of the team, co-founder, I believe. I know where he came from. He came from the sort of the royalty side of the business and created a very, very cool company back in the day to handle royalties. But what's your background? How did you kind of attach yourself to both this sort of mix of music industry and cryptocurrencies and blockchain and DeFi?
Yeah, it's not that linear, or I originally, a long time ago, I was a sound engineer. So I was working in music studios. This is back in Australia, so record engineer, mix engineer, did a little bit in radio as well, and then moved into film and TV. And I actually moved to New York in 2012 for the first time, and because I wanted to work in music and film and TV in New York. And I worked on a few independent films and things like that, some independent TV productions. So really got a good understanding at the creator level what it's like to be in the studio capturing session musician information and then making that sure that flows back to the royalties, and then hearing artists constantly talking about waiting to, I didn't get on this track or whatever, or the royalty check wasn't coming. So just being a part of living that experience. But then ultimately it wasn't enough for me to earn decent income. So I think I had to get like a real job, I guess, that could pay the bills. Found my way into data and analytics somehow, and had to move back to Australia and started working for a company that just did like attribution modeling for large brands. So looking at their media spend, being able to build a model that says, well, if you shift your budget into these channels, this is how many sales orders you can generate. And I was just always fascinated by what brands and advertisers were doing with data. This was like in 2014, 2015. So this idea of like single customer view and unifying all these data points across mobile and desktop and offline advertising was like really fascinating to me, because they were using data in such a really interesting way, and oftentimes in a very powerful way, where they could say, if we shift $1 million into this channel, we could generate 70,000 sales, and be pretty accurate with the modeling too. And I was just thinking, like, that wasn't really the case in the music industry. There wasn't that level of data-driven thinking or decision-making. Typically it's like, okay, we have a budget for radio and we're doing a 50K push on radio, but the ability to then measure that in a very quick fashion just didn't happen. And oftentimes it wasn't even the case. It was just, well, in 2 or 3 or 4 quarters, when we get the reporting data, we'll see how much money we made back or what revenue we got. And there wasn't that real-time feedback. So I started thinking about a lot of those things, like how can you take this data, and that is in the industry, because at that time, the industry was starting to generate a lot of streaming data. How do you use that data to be able to, impact the speed at which money can move? And the other side of it is, around that time was 2015. I'd always been aware of Bitcoin and just knew it and kind of dismissive of it, I guess. It's just like, well, it's a currency that people use in various parts of the internet. And so it wasn't until 2015 when Ethereum came out and I just started reading more about that, this idea that you could, effectively like represent tangible goods or assets digitally on the blockchain and be able to fund them, that it kind of like put 2 and 2 together and just figure out, well, there has to be some connection here. There has to be some way to take this data and be able to plug it into and create some sort of digital asset. And there has to be some sort of financial mechanism you can build around that. And so that's what really started the genesis, was like, there just has to be a way that this all fits together. And so I've spent like the last 4 or 5 years trying to figure that out. And I think we've got to where we are now, which is something that works, and I do believe solves this problem for creators.
That makes much more sense now. I hadn't really appreciated your background and your journey into that, but that's actually, it's more linear than you think, I have a feeling.
Yeah, I guess it does. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, no, it all makes sense. All that they're pieces of a jigsaw puzzle there. And one of the things I sort of wanted to cover at the very beginning of this is that if we can just sort of bring up the acronym NFT for a second, because I think for a lot of my listeners and just generally people in the music industry, there's been so much coverage over the idea of an NFT being nothing more than a GIF. Talk about how you mentioned it very briefly there in your description of when you started to look at Ethereum, how you could attach real world stuff to the blockchain. So can you just kind of give us a little bit more about how that piece of it works?
Yeah, so NFTs are non-fungible tokens, which are effectively just digital assets or digital representations of assets. What separates them from other cryptocurrencies is other cryptocurrencies are considered fungible tokens, in that there are numerous of them and they can be swapped for equal value amongst a larger group. With non-fungible tokens, the idea is that they're unique and similar, and they can't be easily, like, the value exchange between one and the other is never one-to-one. There's always some various difference. That's what makes them unique. It's been an interesting start to the year, I think, the way NFTs have kind of exploded. We've sort of been around this circle for a number of years now, and remember back to like the first album being released on NFTs, which was probably RAC maybe in like 2017, doing with the Ujo music crew. And it was like so far ahead of its time, obviously, that unfortunately I don't think that project was able to sustain, and I don't think they're longer active now, but they were so far ahead of the time. It's just interesting to see everyone catch up to that, not only just within music, but then in the wider visual arts and media space as well. I think one of the interesting things is obviously what we've seen at the start of the year is this wild market where it seems to be just a convergence of market influences and a lot of people having extra cash, and the cryptocurrency space in general was doing really well. So a lot of people had a lot of excess ETH or a lot of excess Bitcoin that they wanted to deploy and be able to leverage in some other way. And the other part to it as well is that it was kind of the birth of a new type of media, at least maybe not a media format as such, but at least a new type of distribution model that allowed itself to have valuations that weren't tethered to reality. And I think that's where you get examples where someone sells an NFT for $2 or $3 million or even higher, is because the value of that is not being assessed on anything that's really existed before. It's like, okay, there's something unique about this digital asset. Maybe there's other parts attached to it where you'll get some sort of physical good in return, but it was really leveraging the hype cycle to say, well, there's nothing to compare this to, so we can push this as far as it goes. And when you're, effectively dealing with people buying in current cryptocurrencies like ETH, where there is no limit to what you can pay for instantly in a spot auction, then you got to that point where it's just like the valuations were very high. And I think one of the things that's kind of happening is maybe like a correction, but then also as people start to introduce different types of NFTs or how they're utilizing it, you'll see a various types of way people are valuing them. So I've seen people like try to tie it to revenue. So it's like I'm selling an NFT and that represents future revenue. That immediately ties it to reality in some way, because everyone can then go look at historical revenue and build a cash flow model and say, well, I believe this NFT is worth X. So I think you'll start to see more and more of that, where different components of a business will be fractionalized through the use of NFTs. Different types of media will be fractionalized. Some of that will be the sort of thing that is grounded to actual income or actual reality. It has a lower valuation. And there'll still be other parts of it that get utilized by artists to create something very new, which is how that gets valued, and the actual social value and the economic value is still largely left for the market to decide.
Just to sort of paraphrase a little bit, so the lending component that happens within your business, it's taking that trend data report from, say, a Spotify, Apple, etc., and it's turning it into an NFT, because by the definition, it is unique in the sense that it belongs to a company, an individual, or a piece of music, or whatever, and it's of course then different to anything else that comes out from a Spotify or an Apple in terms of trend data reporting, and you're creating that NFT. So you're is it fair to say that it's a little bit like I'm just trying to think of good ways of explaining this and paraphrasing it for people, is it a bit like invoice factoring? Is it that kind of concept?
Yeah, we took the basic model from invoice factoring, the idea that you had some sort of future income and then could monetize that. So it's just how could you represent that digitally, I think. Because we do find that when we talk about NFTs, most people in the music industry, in the media space, have a very different idea of NFTs. They're thinking about media NFTs or art NFTs or music NFTs. As an aside, I don't think music NFTs are that valuable yet, just because I think it's a different media to visual art. So I haven't really figured out what the really great use case for music NFTs are yet. But when we talk about NFTs, we're talking more about a financial instrument or financial asset. So this is something that the block, like Ethereum in particular, has been really good at building different markets and financial markets around different use cases for not only fungible tokens, but also non-fungible tokens. And so, there's different protocols that leverage these different levers in different way, are able to leverage different assets in different ways. So we worked out a way where we could take data, basically time box the value of that data. So this is data representing 1 day or 1 week or 1 month. We know when the repayment is occurring. We know who the counterparty is. We know the general value of this. So we can then issue an NFT or a digital asset that has, the value of the forthcoming revenue, the discount that's attached to that, and then be able to plug that into different lending protocols to say, well, here's an NFT we're putting up as collateral. We can then draw from those protocols the value of that NFT and then pay that down to the users. And that's sort of like the mechanism that makes it happen. It's always been something we've been working on this for at least since the end of 2018, so a while now, because I think operationally there's some really compelling larger implications that come from getting this thing right. Like, for us especially, it's no longer like we don't have to go to a bank now and get a credit facility and say, hey, and be on the hook for a $20 million or $50 million credit facility and the cost of maintaining that, the cost of refinancing at the end of that either. We as a company now can just tap into an almost limitless pool of capital without having to run that on our books. So we don't have the cost of maintaining that. And as we scale our business, we just automatically have this system that is constantly pumping in collateral, allows us to pull money out and that can work and scale at the speed that we need it to. And it's also helped us get capital at the price point that we want to get as well.
This point here is that you've read my mind. This is exactly sort of where I was going to sort of take the conversation, because what you've done is so important and relevant to the music industry. I didn't interviewed a lady called Remy Harris, a good friend of mine. She wrote a book about essentially helping people to fund their music projects, because if you're an artist, it's very difficult. You can't go into a bank because the bank will say, what is it I'm lending against? It isn't necessarily a physical product like a car or something like that you might be able to get a loan for. And so you just have very limited options. And of course, traditionally, the music industry has sort of lent within its own ecosystem. So record companies and publishers being probably the most obvious way with which, cash flow is achieved, through the concept of the advance. But what you've done is you've tapped into liquidity sitting in the cryptocurrency world, where people are wanting to make money. They're wanting to lock their cash up into these vaults where that money can then be redeployed and utilized in other ways. And of course, the really hard thing for all artists or songwriters is how do you get to the next day, right? And if you've got a project out at the moment and it's doing quite well, you want to perhaps double down on some of your marketing spend, but you can't do that unless you've got the money to spend, right? And so what you've done is so fundamentally important, because what you're saying is almost as soon as, and I know it's not exactly instantaneous, but it's damn close to it. As soon as that track is played on one of these streaming services, and presumably this can go into other forms of exploitation later on, but right now this is a very good use case. That money can be accessed, and then it can be redeployed, and of course all of this is it's a sort of a compounding positive to the output of the artist, because they're able to make more, because they're able to communicate to more, enlarge their fan base, or however they're doing it, go on that tour, spend that money on that ad spend on on a new music video that they've decided to make partway through the campaign, or whatever it might be. They can now do that because they can access their money much sooner and much faster, and that is why I'm so excited about what you've done, because you've actually solved, using blockchain technology, a really important problem for the music industry, and you've done it in a way that really only this blockchain technology could be used for. Because to me, there are so many other. I've been in the music industry a long time. Went to a lot of panels, heard a lot of people talk about it, and I always felt that whenever it got talked about, they were almost trying to solve a problem that wasn't there. They were just trying to deploy the use of blockchain technology into a current situation, and there was actually no real need for them to do it. They were just making it harder, right? Whereas what you've done is you've actually found a really good use of it.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think we've been pretty thoughtful about how we've approached it, and our first attempt at this was probably 2018, and we had an application, a web application, and users could log in, and we had the MetaMask integration, and we had this like 2-token model, and we had this marketplace. So a user could come in, connect their data, they could start to issue their own tokens that can be sold and then financed through a marketplace. But it's just like at that stage, especially, it was just like people like, what is this? Like, why do I don't need tokens. I want money. Like, I need to pay rent, or I need to invest into marketing. It's like, these things don't really matter that much to my business. Maybe that would do differently now, I'm not sure, but we just that was a learning for us, that there's still a long way to go for not only just artists, but also the business layer as well to interoperate with it. And so we thought a lot about how we could abstract a lot of that. I think there's more of an acceptance now where people would be willing to get paid in ETH. I mean, some artists are, if they're monetizing NFTs, and a lot of times they're getting paid in ETH. So people are getting more familiar with wallets. I think the idea of stable coins that people, particularly artists, are getting more comfortable with. So I think there's opportunity to bring in some of that into the product, but largely we've tried to abstract all of that. So it's just a back end operation that, as an artist, all you're feeling is like, it's just payments to you. It's just like, I'm not thinking about these different mechanisms that are running behind it. I'm just connecting data and being able to access that. To your point about reinvestment, that seems to be like the number one thing when we talk to artists. We've even polled artists and things like that, and that's always what comes up as the number one reinvestment is marketing and promotion, and that's what they need to use it for. And we looked at I don't know, there's some great like documentaries on Netflix and YouTube, like looking at G-Eazy, and a couple of other artists like the Sonder crew, and it's like, just talking about their way to growth, and they saved up all of their money from every YouTube video, and they'd save up for a year, and then they'd make a video, and then that's sort of how they'd kickstart the whole thing. We want to impact that entire cycle now, because it's not about saving up now. It's like you're getting and accessing to that, and you can flip things over much faster, and as an artist be able to reinvest and take more control earlier than you can. Otherwise, to your point, you can, the way to access cash is to either do a label deal or some sort of other advance. And I think that's just been, it's worked for some artists, but for the majority it hasn't really worked. And so I think it's been just like, they've just been a really underserved market for such a long time. And so we're really happy about bringing something new that can hopefully make the playing field more even, or at least give them or democratize access to financial products that they didn't have access to before.
Yeah, and I think I'm always very careful on this podcast to not sort of talk down about many of the great organizations and companies that are in the music industry, and actually certainly I've spent a lot of my time on the indie side, and a lot of independent record companies, and sometimes this is a manager that's really just set up a label for facilitating putting their managed artists records out. Sometimes that cash flow, it's not just about the artist being an independent DIY on their own. They're doing everything on their own. Sometimes it is just the fact that there is not enough firepower in those companies that are trying to help these artists get to the next stage of their career. They just don't have it. They don't have it to risk and all the rest of it. And so again, sort of shortening that cycle means that perhaps they don't need to take such a large advance from, say, their distribution company, right? And so then the distribution company can cut them a slightly better deal in terms of the commercials, and all of this is sort of a trickle down into hopefully a better reward for the artist who is actually making the music. So again, I thought it was so elegant how you solved an actual problem by using blockchain technology and unlocked very specifically that liquidity that is so sought after by so many sort of facets of the record industry. So I thought that was really good. And so I don't know how technical I want to get on this episode particularly. I don't know how bothered by those sorts of things my listeners are, but I do want to touch upon something you mentioned just then about how the introduction of, or the acceptance of use cases for stable coins, because you do use the DAI stable coin within the sort of the back end of what you've done, that you've not that you've hidden it from people. You just said, look, it's not important, it all works, just worry, you just worry about this bit. But would you mind just trying to explain as best you can, because and I will try and shortcut this slightly for you. So when I started looking at it a bit more in depth, throughout my research, what I didn't realise was even how the banks issue money, right? And of course the concept of the gold reserve, and then they're actually creating the currency, lending it to, say, a high street bank, and then when it's repaid, they rip it up, they burn it, they get rid of it, and then they mint more based on the next arrangement, and that's what's happening within these systems, right? And so you're using the MakerDAO protocol and the DAI stablecoin. Can you talk a little bit about that and the Tin Lake implementation? I don't know how easy that is to do in a sort of.
I'll try to hopefully make it straightforward. I think one of the things in the ecosystem in general was people were aware of the volatility of cryptocurrencies as an asset in general, and then so if you wanted to get mainstream adoption or even institutional adoption and have banking reserves starting to think about looking at this, they needed to get away from that level of volatility. And so a number of projects started just looking at how could we create more price stable currencies, and the stable coin has been like one of a big focus for in the ecosystem for the past couple of years. And there's been like two different ways to solve that. One is like a backed stable coin, or which is usually backed by US dollars. So for every dollar in cash that's sitting in a bank somewhere, they'll issue a digital dollar that is a digital representation of that dollar. And the idea is that that'll maintain its peg because it's backed 1-to-1 with an actual US dollar sitting in a bank somewhere. So those are like Gemini, Tether with theirs. So there's a number of like backed reserve stablecoins like that. And the other side of it is algorithmic stablecoins, which uses some fairly complex money equation algorithms to work out based on the amount of collateral that's sitting in a reserve pool somewhere. There'll be stable coins issued, and it uses a number of different economic levers to make sure that based on supply and demand, that peg will largely stay around $1. But they're not backed by USD. They are backed by a pool of other currencies, maybe ETH, maybe it might be wrapped Bitcoin or various types of different currencies, but there's different levers that they leverage to make sure that the peg maintains the stablecoin maintains its peg 1-to-1 to the US dollar. MakerDAO is an algorithmic stablecoin. It's probably been one of the longest projects out there that's been working. It has been very effective at maintaining its peg. I think there's been a couple of incidences, like maybe 2 or 3 incidents over the past couple of years where the peg has dropped, but it's been solved. Usually that's to do with like when the market acts irrationally, so if there's a huge runoff. But importantly, I think in the huge sell-off that happened at the end of 2017, it was able to maintain its peg throughout that. So I think they're getting better, and the algorithms, at least the systems, are starting to get better at maintaining that peg. And so all that's been about is just trying to produce some sort of digital asset that is now without volatility. And that's what we like about those as well, because this idea that if we're taking this data that's say worth $10,000 and then converting it into a volatile cryptocurrency, and then at some point if we go to, or the artist goes to then cash that out, and now it's worth $8,000 because the market dropped, that wasn't really acceptable outcome for us. So for us, it was about finding a way we could leverage something that's more stable. So if an artist is earning that $10,000 and we're doing this on the back end, when we're paying out, it's $10,000 always, and we can maintain that price point and maintain a stability of that. Right now, what we're doing is, on our back end, we're interfacing with this protocol. We're getting this DAI stablecoin put into our digital wallet, and then we're converting that into USD and then paying that into the customer's accounts. I think the opportunity now is that as people get more comfortable with it, we can introduce the concept of the digital dollar, because there's a lot of benefits for an artist or a creator to actually keep that in DAI. And one of them is largely just around money movement, because the slowest and most expensive, or at least inefficient part of our entire process is that conversion from DAI into USD. Right now, we can take a piece of data, we can collateralize that into an NFT, we can plug it into the protocol, we can get 10,000 DAI into our wallet. The cost of that, it used to be a couple of dollars, it's a little more now. But within a matter of minutes, we have 10,000 DAI sitting in our wallet. And then if they had a digital wallet, we could send it to them in a matter of minutes as well. And you've just done almost an entire funding cycle in a matter of minutes for a very low cost. Right now, we transfer it to USD, and so there's a cost to do that. The clearance time for the banks as well can take up to almost a week. So this initial process of funding the DAI happens in minutes, and then the process of getting that into USD can take up to a week, as well as the cost of wires as well. So it just introduces a lot of friction. So I think for us, it's an opportunity to educate people about digital dollars and how there may be benefits for them to be able to incorporate that and keeping it in there, because then they can then use the advantages of moving that money around as well. I do think there'll need to be some other things enabled for them to do that. For example, being able to spend on a card that's connected to a stablecoin wallet, which just isn't there yet. I think Circle is probably the closest to that, but even then it's not, I don't think it's fully operational yet, but I think that's the closest to being to achieving that. But even then there's still some pieces there. So I think for that, once that part is solved, then people will get more comfortable. Because again, for me anyway, I think I look at it as just, it largely has to be how can I use it in my everyday? I don't think for most people it's a political decision whether they're using cryptocurrency. It's just does it work for me in my everyday? And once that part is solved, I think you'll start to see more adoption or more usage of that.
That was excellent. Really, really clear. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us. I hope for a lot of people that will start to demystify some of this, because it is confusing for anyone who hasn't spent the time looking into it and reading about it, because it does just sound very complicated because of all the jargon. But what I thought was really interesting there when you were talking about the idea that actually people sort of remove that need to always back that coin token into something like the US dollar, because if you think about it, in the production of that music, there are many players, and that could be a marketing company as much as it could be a drummer or something in a band. And if you were if you needed to make payments to any of these people, then there is no real reason why you have to always pay them in US dollars. If everybody understood that they could receive these stable coins, like the DAI stable coin, and of course these days there are so many token swap apps that mean you can move from one to the other so quickly. Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's no reason why that money that you're making available to them in that stable coin, for I know you're not doing that right now, but if you did, and therefore it was much more instantaneous, then they could actually, in their own little ecosystem of the things that they've got to get done, just send that money to people so that they've got it. Because then you start to sort of remove that need to make that conversion at one point so quickly. Other people can make their own decision about when they actually need to back that out into a fiat currency, that is the way of describing US dollars, sterling, etc.
Right, and also because, especially the usefulness of a stable coin is, at least in the US, is that they consider cryptocurrencies to be property. So when you convert it into USD, that's a sale event, which is a taxable event. But if it's a stable coin where there's no respect one-to-one, then you kind of avoid that. So there is some tax help there, I believe. But to your point about like issuing payments, like that was one of the things everyone started talking about, was this idea of smart contracts and royalty automation, right? It's how do you have this contract that can capture deal terms and splits, and then you can just send a bunch of money to it, and then based on the logic, it can immediately spit that out and pay all of the subscribers to that contract, which I think it'll get there. I think the fractionalization of media and assets and rights will happen. But to your point about people talking about it, but then not actually solving the problem, was kind of like, okay, it solves a problem of distribution, but as we know in the industry, a lot of times attribution is like the biggest problem. And I don't think it solves that. It's like if you have bad data or incorrect rights holders on a smart contract, it's still bad data and incorrect rights holders. It doesn't solve that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. That's often the one that people, pick up on, this idea that, this is all going to be easy. We don't need lawyers anymore. You just like, or you could just put that streaming service on the blockchain, whatever the hell that means, right? But it's like, but that sounds like a terrible idea, because we've already got problems with people, uploading a fake Kanye West album or whatever it might be, right? It's like these you're still going to get bad actors in all of this. Your point there about having good data go in. And these systems are only as good as the data that you put into them, right? So,
yes.
I wrote a blog post for another company. I gave you guys a shout out the other day, and I talked about.
Appreciate that.
So yeah, of course, no problem. As I say, I'm very much enamored with what you've done, and one of the things that I think we're going to start seeing is companies almost trying to rebuild what they've already done. I mean, most of the record industry is mired in their legacy tech debt, and they're always trying to sort of reinvent themselves and building on top of each other. And I think there was certainly a period of time where people they thought that they could just switch it to it being blockchain, and you just think that doesn't take away any of the problems that you've already got. That you've got conflicts happening in claiming of rights in particular, and you think about. I built Level for Warner, which is their DIY distribution platform, and we had to have audible magic in there, because otherwise people were just going to upload whatever they wanted and claim audio that belongs to somebody else for themselves. I mean, this is a huge problem in the industry. So it's all very well and good saying, oh, well, it's okay, but you can just have that one unique token that sits on the blockchain that represents your music. Okay, but somebody else could also upload that and claim that as theirs. And Audius, probably the best known streaming service that has tried to implement this, that is hampered by the same problems, right? I mean, have you got some thoughts on Audius?
I do know that they got a lot of bad press maybe a year or two ago, when people were uploading like Kanye West albums on there, and they didn't really have a process in place for detecting fraud or anything like that. I'm not sure how they've resolved that. I believe like if you're the rights owner, you can like make a claim, and then I'm not sure how it actually gets taken down, because the idea for a lot of people with it's like on the blockchain is that it's permanent. So I don't know if the actual media disappears or whether they just act to remove it from the library that they actually have to stream. I do like the Audius project, and a lot of some of the ideas behind it. I think it's very cool. I think they have to solve the monetization piece. It's just like everyone gets paid. I don't think artists are getting paid yet on that. But I think eventually the idea is you get paid in their coin, and then hopefully if the coin increases in value, then you will, as an artist, obviously that'll have some value to you. I think that's where they've managed to survive, which is very good. I think a lot of projects that came out like 2017 were doing the same thing. It's like, stream on our platform, you get paid in our coin. But then when people realize that the coins weren't worth anything, then it's like, well, it doesn't actually help me make money. Like I'm putting in all this work and putting it on here, but there's no actual economic value being imparted to me. So most of those projects end up dying. So I think Audius has done very well to survive. I think other things that are philosophically interesting about it, like I think yesterday there was the news that SoundCloud were going to double down in A&R and things like that. And so from an Audius perspective, they're focused on building more of a decentralized system where it's a protocol that can enable direct artist uploads, direct fan engagement, direct monetization. And so the general philosophical idea is that decentralized system is capturing more value at the creator level. And you contrast that with maybe SoundCloud's decision, which seems to be more trying to accrue value vertically within SoundCloud rather than down to the users, or spreading that down to the users. So again, I think the ideas behind Audius are really interesting, and then hopefully if they've resolved some of those things around fraudulent uploads and things like that. But again, I think they have to solve the monetization piece for them to really take off. And that's always been the case with any project is, does this replace my income on Spotify or not? And if not, then it becomes, how does this really make any value for me? Which is like, goes back to the NFT thing, is that a lot of artists and music artists found success there because now I can sell an NFT for $2,000, which would maybe take me 2 years to earn that on Spotify.
I think we are really still only at the very beginning of all of this. And as I say, your project stands out because it's solving a real problem, whereas some of these other things are, they're getting closer to it, but it's not really solving the exact problem. And I like the Audius thing because it sort of has aspects of that direct-to-fan concept, which is the Bandcamp thing that's really done very well recently. That is that, I suppose, where cryptocurrencies are addressing some of the issues with the monopolistic aspects of the finance world. Things like Audius theoretically and Bandcamp theoretically are allowing sort of the removal of some of those layers of noise between the artist and the audience, and it's getting them closer and actually helping them earn a living directly because they can control much more of it. I interviewed the founder of Superpass, which is a kind of an early version of Patreon or something like that, right? And their whole world is about trying to help creators earn money directly from their fans and actually have a relationship directly with their fans, and so that they can control that communication layer as well. And so all of these sort of little projects or big projects are addressing real problems. To me, at least, they are getting people closer to having a much better ability to just do a better job of being an artist and being able to communicate with your fans. That seems to often get lost because other people want their pound of flesh. They want to get in the way. They want to say that they're helping, but I don't know that they always are. And so as I say, what I really like about yours is it just seems to just cut out so much of the noise. You've taken on the difficult bit of figuring out how to do it, but you've made that much easier for people. So I really appreciate that. So who are the sorts of companies that are using Paperchain right now? So
we started out looking at this from a B2B level and working directly with distributors and labels. So these are companies like Cartel, Tierra del Fuego, Zender, so independent label services and distribution companies. At that stage, we are just like issuing payments monthly. So, get to the end of the month, we're in May right now, come June 3rd, there's a payment for your month, for your May income, which is typically for them around depending on the deal terms, could be anywhere from 60 to 90 days ahead of when they usually get paid. That, what we were missing there, I think, is just that, how do we impact the end creator and end artist? That was kind of missing for us. And so how can we also make that easier for the distribution companies as well, right? Because now they have this money that now they have the liability of having to distribute that. And so as we thought about how we put together the wallet and card product, it's like, well, this makes it easy then, because then we know who's generated it. We can distribute that to them. Now you're just like, the money is just funneling straight to them. You don't have that liability anymore. So you're providing a better payments experience for your creators. You can get them paid faster, and then it just also lowers your, not liabilities, but it lowers the admin overhead you have for distributing that, because now everything just flows through our system, which is largely automated. When we first launched, we launched the product proper in June last year, and I think first month we paid out $2,000. I think we're just about to cross, this month we crossed $1 million, I think, paid out. And then right now we're just in private beta with a couple of large distributors, onboarding like some of their top artists right now, starting to issue payments. And hopefully end of July, I think we'll start announcing some of those partnerships and then the artists that are using it. And hopefully what we want by the end of this year is that not right now we're sort of limiting who can access it from an artist standpoint, because we want to make sure we have the relationship with the distributor, because we need to get access to the bulk API keys, and that's what makes it possible for us to actually do the daily payments. What we want by the end of the year is that any artist or creator can open up a wallet and a card and get access to that, but not all of them will have access to daily payments. So you can get access to the card and you can enjoy the benefits of using it and send any money or any of your income, and this can become the place where all of your digital income earns. Once we can add, digital wallet capabilities, if you're selling NFTs, you can send your ETH there, so it can all live in one place. And then if we do get integrated with your distributor, then you can get daily payments, and that's where it becomes really interesting for you. Because I think, again, I think it's a convergence of a lot of ideas and a lot of philosophies over time. People have been trying to solve this. The artists are doing very well, and the NFT ecosystem around that direct sale experience. I think there's some areas that could probably, like the post sale is some sort of areas that can be optimized. Like, okay, I have this NFT, what do I do with that now? So the ability to plug in and access new experiences based on how you're interacting is like really interesting. And that's where, as a fan, you can sort of start to monetize or start to build some sort of monetized community. And then, we're just starting to think about how that sort of plays into how we can best serve artists and what they're trying to achieve as well.
And what other DeFi projects are you sort of seeing in the industry at the moment that you quite like and wish you'd thought of, or anything like that? Is there anything else that you're noticing?
One particularly within music and the NFT space is like Eula Beats, which I was like really just, it took me a while to get my head around, but it's like more of like an out, it's one of the things for people listening is like one of the limitations with NFTs right now is there's a limit to what you can actually store on there. You can't actually store media on there yet. You can store maybe a hash that references media, but when you're buying an NFT, you're really buying a digital asset that points to the real asset, which sits on a server somewhere. Eula Beats was, to me, one of the first to try and incorporate the actual underlying uniqueness of the media or the audio into the NFT itself, by doing this algorithmically generating these algorithmic music that would then, the pattern of that would get captured in the NFT. So the NFT doesn't exist without the music, which is, to me, is like, I don't know of any project that actually done that yet. And then the way they also price the contract is the price of those NFTs are actually captured in a bonding curve, which is an economic theory around supply and demand and how that impacts and can drive the cost of an item. And so what happens is when the first NFT is minted, and they call it like a record, so you press the NFT like you'd press a record, and that may cost 1 ETH to do that. And so now this is live, and this is an NFT, and anyone can come and then duplicate and press that record again, so they can make a copy and own the copy of that record. But every time someone does it, because it's attached to a bonding curve, the price of that increases. So the first time may cost 1 ETH, but then the next person who wants to make a copy of it, it costs them 2 ETH, and then it keeps going up. And so some of the initial presses, the first issuance was 1 ETH, and then I think at one stage it cost like nearly $100,000 if you wanted to make another copy of this NFT. And at each stage of that sales process, the original creator is getting 8% of the resale value. So I don't think it's scalable, because obviously you're pricing out a lot of people who can't afford that. But I think it was a really novel way to look at how different economic theories could play into monetizing content like that. And so if you think about the implications for how it could work for licensing and other sorts of monetizations aspects of media, I think there's something there, which was very interesting. And I've also just been like diving into the world of like DAOs, which is just like, decentralized governance and things like that, and how they could potentially be solved. Things like curation and tastemaking, something I've been working on, and even just some of the more interesting like NFT things like CryptoPunks. So sort of like diving into the aspects of that and how that could be translated into different areas. There's just a lot to sort of sift through, and it is a lot of noise. And even still, some of the technical things just go right over my head. So I try to keep it as simple as possible for me and just go after the things that are sort of like, at least I feel like this is something that I could really invest myself in following for a while.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of projects out there, and I think most people, anyone who has any interest in this, like myself, it's very much a secondary thing, but it can consume so much of your time reading white papers and and clicking through links that have other links to other things, and yeah, you can definitely rabbit hole very, very quickly in this space for sure.
I think part of it is luck, right? But one of the interesting things is that you now have people who don't actually work for anyone, but they work for a variety of DAOs or decentralized organizations or projects. And it's like, if they get onto the right one, they've been rewarded in the tokens of that. And then all of a sudden the tokens shoot up to $5-10. Like they are now, $100,000 or $1 million sitting in their wallet, and so you're starting to see sort of a different approach to people who are working in the industry as well, where it's not just like, well, I'm going to work for this one employer and that's my thing. It's like, I'm going to work for them, but then I'm also, I'm helping curate this community on this DAO on the side too, and I'm getting paid in tokens for that. And I'm doing this other thing here too. So you're starting to see people spread themselves across projects, and that becomes their work, because one of the interesting things about tokenization in general is that you can monetize communities in that way. So if you're performing roles within the community, you can get rewarded financially for that. And that, if the market is doing well, can be enough to supplement a full income.
To a lesser extent than like actually supplementing an income, but maybe it could. Some of the projects that I've looked at are based on that reward-based system. So if you are say a fan of an artist and you do an action like stream something, post something, like something, whatever it might be, whatever that action is, you can then earn a token, whatever that token may be, as a reward for that action. And theoretically, just by being a super fan of maybe a range of artists, you could actually theoretically earn some supplementary income. Maybe it's just enough to pay for the petrol to get in the car to go to the gig, right? Maybe it's just like that. But why not? Why not become? I mean, one of the things I perhaps would liken this to is the idea of it being a street team. Now, sometimes street teams were just, kids at universities that, got sent some posters and they put them up in their local venue. Or it was actually they were activated. They were working for, say, a record company that was paying for them to do genuine street, sort of focused street team activities. But why not, right?
Yeah, I think one of the groups I'm a part of is called FWB, Friends with Benefits, which was started largely mostly music people working in various spaces, but now there's like a large community and there's like thousands and thousands of members now. But it's coordinated and run entirely on a Discord server. But to actually enter, you have to hold a certain amount of the tokens to get in. I think you have to hold like 60 FWB coins, which is a little Ponzi-ish. And so I think that they're doing a really good job of trying to work out how that adds value, right? So, at one stage, I think tokens are worth like $5 now, but at one stage they were worth like nearly $20. So your 60 FWB actually accrues in value. And it was kind of like, as more people were joining, it was part of this like market cycle. So as more people joining, the price of it went up. So everyone loved it, because it's like, well, if I can get more people to join, the price of this goes up, which to me is like a little Ponzi-ish. But so I think for those communities, like, they need to find some way to tap revenue into the value. Like, there has to be some form of revenue, to me anyway, that is driving the price of that. Otherwise it is just like instead of like tokenomics, it's just like Ponzi-nomics. It's just sort of like, well, the more people that join, the more valuable it is, which is it's a bit weird. But I think the community is doing a pretty good job of trying to figure out how to draw those revenue incomes so that the value of the token is actually based on something real and not just like, how many people I can get to join up.
And I was going to ask, are there any sort of non-music industry cases the use cases out that you like? But you've kind of already done that, so I don't know if there's anything else in particular you wanted to add to that.
Like, again, the financial side of things is like really interesting. A lot of people can make fair criticisms that I think people working in these projects are very bold in their claims and how it can disrupt financial services. But I do think to a point they're correct, and that's why you are seeing reserve banks push back and things like that, because they're not going to give up the sovereignty of the currency. So there's that general risk there, and this is where it could potentially lead to. You can start to build entire ecosystems. Even now, you could start to get paid in stable coins, and if there's a mechanism for you to actually utilize those in your day-to-day, then you don't need a bank account anymore. Like, it's getting closer and closer to that point. And I think that's what reserve banks are starting to take notice of. So the things that are happening at a financial level, like, really, really interesting.
Yeah, very good. Okay, well, we've come up on time, which is amazing because it's flown by. So to my listeners, thank you for listening. As ever, I welcome all feedback, comments and suggestions for future shows. My Twitter handle is @AlexBranson, or you can go to the website www.abcmusic.co, and there's a contacts page on there. Thank you, Dan, very much for your help. I will put links to your project in the show notes.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it.
Thanks. All right. Cheers.